Earlier you mentioned making environmental justice a mainstream topic. Tell me what do you mean by that?
Well, I think that the roots of the environmental justice movement and most Americans' vision of it is that it's something over there. It happens in a community that's not mine. It happens that as a just and fair person, I want to make sure those issues are brought to the table, but I don't see them as my issues. And I actually don't think that's a correct paradigm for any of us to be working towards. We know that rarely is pollution entirely localized. And so from a justice perspective, sure, I care about a community in Houston, say, that may be suffering the ill effects of air emissions from the refineries that are located right next to them. But as an American downwind of that issue, or as someone who may not live anywhere near Houston, but may have refineries upwind of me somewhere else, or as someone on the east coast of this country who gets prevailing winds, all those issues are actually tied together. And I think that it is very much Americans' central view that clean air and clean water and clean land are their rights as Americans. And you can't say that and in the same sentence say it's not all Americans' rights. So I want to join those two issues together, make sure that our issues in the environmental justice movement are the country's issues. They cannot be looked at as separately. There do not have to be winners and losers in this environmental game, if you will.
So now that's sort of a different take from the environmental justice argument from 15 years ago. Would you agree?
I would, but I also think that most environmental justice advocates have moved forward and led the movement to different places. For instance, when I talk to environmental justice advocates today, they're just as likely to talk about wanting to share in this green economy that President Obama is trying to build around energy and saying, listen, we want to make sure that we still are redressing the issue that these new facilities in our communities have to be clean. We have to have a voice in whether or not they're sited, how they're sited, who gets employed, all those important issues that the environmental justice movement brought to the table and advanced over decades. And thank God they did. But now they're also looking past that to say, if we're looking at a new economy for this country, if we're looking at the fact that this economy is going to be built on clean energy, we want to make sure that we are part of that discussion as well, that whatever system we have for dealing with carbon pollution doesn't leave us out of the mix or isn't based on the assumption that the same old plants are going to operate in the same old neighborhoods in the same old way.
So are we looking at a new environmental justice now versus the one from years ago when the crowd was at the table, we want to be involved in the decision making, to one that says we want to be involved in the decision making, but we want to participate as well in the activities?
I hope so.
And reap the benefits.
I hope so. I mean, I wouldn't presume to speak for the leaders of the environmental justice movement who have brought it so far, including yourself. But I also wouldn't presume to say that they haven't recognized for quite some time that the issues of environmental justice are in many ways fundamental to our success with broader environmental issues in this country. So yeah, I would say yes, but I would also say that I would never want to lose the thing that brought us all to the table, which is a fundamental recognition at the community level that things aren't right. That's what breeds an environmentalist, if you will. One day you wake up and you see a plant or a facility in your neighborhood and you start to ask the right questions, and the minute you do, we got ourselves an environmentalist. And the color of their skin's only important to the extent that it means that we're building a broader and broader coalition around those issues. And the more we do, the more environmentalism is mainstream, and the more the American people will rise up and demand their rights for clean air and clean water.
How will we know when environmental justice becomes mainstream?
That's one of those, you know it when you see it, I guess, arguments. Listen, I think people rightfully say, listen, we have an African-American president. We have an African-American woman as head of the EPA. Are we there yet? And I think rightfully the answer is no, we're not there yet, because there are still communities that either don't know or sadly just accept the fact that pollution is one of the burdens that comes with where they live or how much money they make. And that's when we get to that point where it is not determinative to look at your income, or not determinative to say, well, you know, historically that's always been sort of the industrial side of town, and therefore there's a whole legacy. When we start to make sure that those areas get the exact same treatment, will start to be there. When we start to grow a whole crop of energy entrepreneurs who are not only invested in, but making money from clean energy and this green economy and low carbon technologies and non-polluting technologies, will be there. Because the other thing that pulls our country towards change is the private sector.
That's true.